Hello and welcome back to Adventure's Edge. This is DM Don again. This is going to be the second video in the How to Play series for Adventure's Edge. So the game book starts off with teaching you how to make a character. And before I dive into walking you through how to make your character, I think it's important to understand what your statistics do for your character. You might be familiar with any of the D20 type games and how your statistics give you attribute bonuses to affect your skills and such. But Adventure's Edge goes a step further where your base statistic is critical to your character. So I want to walk you through those so you understand that before you assign your points. So I'm going to go ahead and share the character sheet. I'm not going to do the whole character sheet breakdown right now, but I do want to just explain how your statistics work. So I'm going to go ahead and share the sheet now. So this is going to be the top half of page 1 of the sheet. You'll recognize, very familiar, 6 characteristics, and a 7th, which is your luck. So when you're building your character, all of your stats are going to be a 10, and then you're going to have 20 points to raise your stats to what you want them to be on a one-to-one basis. So it's a pseudo point buy because you don't get a decrementing cost as you increase your stat. If you want an 18 strength, it's going to cost you 8 points to bump your strength up to 18. Now your stats will be adjusted slightly. Your strength and dex can get modified slightly based upon the size of your character initially. So with that said, let me explain how these stats work differently at Adventure's Edge. So strength is your character's physical strength. It affects critically how much weight you can carry. So in a system that really pays attention to encumbrance and how much you can carry, including how much armor weighs, your strength is pretty critical, because if you plan on being a tank type fighter and you want to carry in a lot of equipment and you want to wear plate armor, you're going to need to have high strength. So that's the first facet. The next part is your strength attack. There's a number of different types of attacks in the game, primarily strength attack, dex attack, and spell attacks. So when you think about melee weapons, most mid and large size weapons are going to be strength-based attacks, which means they're going to be based upon your combat skill and how strong you are. Your dex attacks are going to be your lightweight weapons, usually small, one-handed, normally what you would call finesse weapons. And then spell attacks is how you're attacking with your spells. So strength attack directly affected by your strength bonus. Strength affects how much you can lift. And the other part that it does is it affects your defense against physical attacks that want to tackle you, reposition you. It is somewhat similar if you're familiar with Pathfinder D&D, at least 3.5 version. It's very similar to like your CMD, whereas when somebody wants to hit you, they're going to make an attack. But when you're wrestling, if they're wanting to take an action on you after they've already engaged with you, it's going to go against your strength stat. So it's basically, one of your physical defenses. So strength, very important. I'm going to say that for all of them because, in my opinion, there is no dump stat in this system. And that makes your initial choices, it may be even more difficult because you really have to think about the strengths and weaknesses of your character. All right, dexterity. Your dexterity stat is your defense bonus, not your stat bonus plus 10 or anything like that. Your dex stat is your defense bonus. So that is what it takes to hit you in combat. Now, it gets increased by the armor you're wearing, and that's how armor functions in the game. So if you're wearing a heavy gambeson, which is like a quilted linen, very common type of armor in the game, it gives you a +4 defense bonus. So if you have a 12 dexterity and you put on a heavy gambeson, your DB, defense bonus, is 16, and that's it. Now, it can go up through maybe improved equipment, or maybe some magical defenses, but that is going to be primarily it. So you have to really think, well, obviously I don't want to get hit, so pretty critical. It also affects a lot of different skills. I didn't even mention the skills. All of your skills are modified by 2 different stats, and I'll cover the skills later because there's a lot of them. So I'm not going to hit those right now, but all of your stats affect combinations of skills. So dexterity, defense bonus. It also directly determines what your movement is. So in this game there's 2 movement values. You have your stride, which is your movement out of combat. It's kind of used to determine movement throughout the day, and it's used in chase scenes. So your stride is your dex stat plus a modifier based upon your height, and that can be modified up or down. So again, if you have a 14 dex stat and you are a 5-foot character, which is going to be a modifier of 0, your stride is just going to be 14. And then your combat move is just a little simplified. It's just that number divided by 5, which is how many spaces on the battle map you can move in the game. So if you have a 14 dex and your stride is 14, you're going to divide that by 5, round up. Everything in the game is always rounded up. You're going to have a 3 combat move because 14 divided by 3 is 14 divided by 5 is 3. So that's how much you can move it around. So obviously very critical, and plus it affects a lot of skills. So dex, obviously very important. So constitution. Your constitution stat is your hit points. If you have a 14 con, you have 14 hit points. Welcome. And they don't go up very easily. You don't go up per level. There's really not too much that makes it go up, other than there are 2 proficiencies that can increase it, and a couple of the classes give you small bumps. But by and large, your hit points are going to be pretty static. So your starting con obviously is very critical for all classes, right? So it also does double duty in the fact that your constitution stat is your resistance against both poisons and diseases. Now, there are a lot of modifiers in addition to that. Different races have modifiers to poison, some against disease, some classes will give you bonuses. So there are ways that will increase your versus poison and disease, but the base resistance is your constitution stat. So obviously a big one. Intelligence. And you can see where this is going. The base stat itself is critical, and that's one of the unique factors of Adventure's Edge. It's not your stat bonuses. Stat bonuses affect your skills. Your stat affects all of your core abilities. So intelligence. Intelligence is your spell resistance. So that is your base resistance against spells. And it also determines your spell points. So in this game, there's no slot-based casting. It's all about spending points to cast the spells on a 1-to-1 basis. So if you have a 14 intelligence, guess what? You can cast 14 spells a day. The other thing is, if you want to be a spellcaster, you have to have a minimum of a 12 intelligence. And that's even if you just want to be, that's not to be just a magician. That's like if I want to be a fighter and I want to cast spells, which are equivalent of like first level spells, because that's another feature of this game, you need to have a 12 intelligence. So minimum of that. You want to be able to cast spells, you need intelligence. So it's your, plus it affects all of your knowledge skills too. So intelligence, pretty important. Wisdom. So wisdom is, affects a lot of different skills, and it also determines what your power is. So there's 2 types of power in the game. You have magic and what we're just going to call power, which is, it's like an intrinsic chi type power that is used to fuel adept powers and also some class-based powers. So it's like this personal power. It's not, it's quasi-magical. It's like an internal type magic. So if you want to be an adept using all sorts of interesting Wuxia type maneuvers, you're going to want a high wisdom. Now, I will also take this time to mention that your initiative is going to be your wisdom stat bonus plus your dexterity stat bonus. So if you have a 12 dex and a 12 wisdom, they both have a +1, you're going to have an initiative of +2. There are very few modifiers to initiative in the game. It's pretty fixed. There are a couple here and there, mostly some class powers. So you want to have a high init, you need to think about, well, then you need to be high dex and high wisdom. All right, charisma. And obviously wisdom obviously affects your perception, which is a pretty critical skill. Charisma. A lot of people think about charisma being a dump stat if you're going to be like the fighter types or other martial types. Charisma does a number of things. It obviously affects all of your social skills, which are very important in the game. Charisma is your leadership score. So this game really leans in on getting followers as you go up in power. So if you want to have a bunch of followers, charisma determines how many followers you can get. So that's going to be your leadership score. Now there's other modifiers to leadership that can increase it, but the base is your charisma stat. Charisma is also your spirit resistance. So you have a number of different resistances in the game. Obviously magic is against spells, but spirit is going to be against powers that can drain your spirit, like certain types of undead. So it also determines what your spirit level is. So if you have a 12 charisma, you have a 12 spirit. And say you're going up against an undead type that is a spirit drain. If you get hit and you lose spirit, that's the value you're losing is your spirit drain, and that's determined by your charisma stat. So if you dump charisma, you're pretty vulnerable in that area. So you can see why they're all important for one reason or another. Now, luck is a stat, and it is a 7th stat. It does function differently from the others. So the other 6 have your stat, and you have a stat bonus. Luck has the base stat, but it doesn't have a bonus because luck goes up and down. It's a very fluctuating value. So when you're recording it on the sheet, you'll notice it's got a square here. You're going to start out with 10 luck, and you'll put a 10 here. So you're going to have your base luck, and then you're going to have your current luck. Because again, you'll spend luck and it will go down. And then there's a little tracker here to keep track of how much luck you've used. So that is going to be your 7 stats at a very high level of what they do. And I'm going to come back and explain how the stats tie into skills next. All right, thanks.